lie. The point of the icebreaker is for you to tell 2 truths and a lie. And we have to figure out which one is the lie. So I'm going to start off. 1, I've been volcano boarding. 2, COVID has caused 4 of my trips to cancel. 3, I can speak 5 languages.
Jeez.
Lie.
So please put your what you think is the truth or what you think is a lie in the chat. If you're on the phone, you can call it out.
5 languages. Jeez.
Okay. 5 languages is the lie. But I definitely had 4 trips canceled because of COVID.
Oh my God.
All right, who would like to go next? Oh, Russell said he was going to go next. Go, Russell.
Yeah, I'll go next. So my first one is I have 2 children, 1 little boy and 1 little girl. I have traveled to 5 continents, and I've been married for 15 years.
2 children, a boy and a girl, 5 continents, and you've been married for 15 years. I don't know. He looks kind of young. I actually know the answer, so I'm going to not.
I think you steer people in the wrong direction. Yeah, and now you got it. It's the children. I have 2 little girls. It's the little girls. Yeah, I got married to my high school sweetheart, and now we kind of old. Not really that old. I'm only 33, so about to make 34. We've been married for a long time. She said I has his bio. That's how I know. That's funny. She cheated. She cheated. Okay.
Also, I know that everyone wanted to know Barbara. Can you tell us more about volcano boarding? I think that's a question in the chat.
I did it in Nicaragua. So I climbed up a volcano. It wasn't active. It was a real volcano. You see the ashes and everything from other eruptions. So we had to climb up with a board, and then we slid down with the board, into the ashes. So yeah.
Adventurous. Thank you.
I've always wanted to. I swear, it's a life goal. But I think that now.
Who wants to go next? 2 more.
Got you.
One of our fellows. Oh, Aaliyah.
Okay. Hi everyone. So my
Aaliyah.
Hello. So I collect Metro cards from different cities. That's one. Another one is I've been on the Eric Andre show on Adult Swim. And the third one is I'm learning how to DJ in my spare time. Which one's the lie? I already know how to DJ. That's funny. Okay, everyone who said that I'm learning how to DJ in my spare time is correct. I've been on the Eric Andre's show before. It was a prank, and they recorded it. If you look through, it's on Hulu, so if you look through a couple seasons, you'll find me dodging human excrement, what I thought was human excrement. So that is a legitimate statement that I made, and I do collect like Metro cards from the cities.
Where you actually are learning how to DJ. It's crazy.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Yeah, no, I still believe that you're learning how to DJ in your spare time. You have whole playlists, like no, like
One day.
All right, one more. One of our students. Yay, Anaya.
Hi, I'm Anaya. So I have a brother. I have a dog named Dash, and I've puked on a roller coaster. Maybe the dog has a different name. So the one that's correct is that I puked on a roller coaster. I've never done that. I do have a dog named
Dash. And one truth.
No, the two truths are I have a brother and I have a dog named Dash, but I've never puked on a roller coaster.
Oh, question. Can everyone hear me? Yeah? Okay. Just got a message. Someone's like not able to hear. So I'm going to try and like just speak up a bit more. So now I think we'll transition to Anaya. To thank you, Barbara, for this activity. I got to learn something new about like everyone here. Apparently, we slide down volcanoes, and we do have dogs, which is interesting. Pass it to Anaya to introduce our speakers, so we can kick into our awesome panel discussion.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anaya, and thank you for joining this call. Definitely with everything going on right now, I hope that everyone is healthy and doing well. Today we'll be talking about COVID-19 with Aaliyah, Russell, and Shalise. Aaliyah Muhammad is a native New Yorker. She's a graduate of Archbishop Malloy High School in Queens and earned a degree in biology and the City College from the City College of New York in 2016. She also has a minor in Black Studies and Theater. Aaliyah is an IYLI alum and has had the opportunity to travel to Brazil, Egypt, and Tanzania as a fellow. After graduation, she remained involved with IYLI and chaperoned the Summer Leadership Institute to Ethiopia. After graduating from college, Aaliyah moved to Washington, D.C. to work in public health at a national level nonprofit. During her tenure, she coordinated engagement between state, federal, and territorial partners. Since 2018, she has worked with the Delaware Department of Health and Human Services as a public health advisor to the State Division of Public Health. Ms. Muhammad was accepted into Columbia University MPH in Ophthalmology program in March of this year. She hopes to use her education to advance her career and contribute innovative and effective public health policies to underserved populations domestically and globally. Russell J. Leddit is a MD and MBA student at the, sorry if I get some words, if I mispronounce some words, at the Tulane School of Medicine, and Freeman School of Business. Prior to attending medical school, Russell obtained his PhD in molecular oncology and tumor im- uh, immunology at NYU School of Medicine. His scientific work focused on prostate cancer biology and therapeutic oh ah therapeutic development utilizing proteomat oh, proteometics and bioinformatics. Tell me if I'm correct. I don't know if that's right. This work was recognized for funding by the Ford Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, as well as the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. While in New York City, Russell founded Clear Direction Mentoring, a nonprofit organization that partnered minority scholars of New York City boroughs, lowest performing high schools, and PhD, and PhD students at top tier research institutes like Cornell, NYU, Columbia, and others. Clear Direction Mentoring was recognized for their outstanding work by Merrill Lynch, Google, and Spotify. He currently plans to go into child and adolescent psychiatry with the focus on mental health for young Black girls and boys. He is a husband of 14 years to Mallory Elise, and the father of two girls, Malia and Melina. Shalise Nelson, LPC, NCC is a licensed professional counselor and certified life coach with over 10 years in the mental health field. Her life's work is to help others on their journey to freedom, recognize their strengths and inner beauty through providing individual therapy services and self-care coaching. In 2017, she developed the Conscious Queen, a mental health forum dedicated to addressing the needs of Black and Brown community by providing apparel, workshops, and challenges geared towards mental wellness. So if you guys have anything to add to your bios, if you want, you can. But if you don't, let's jump right in. We'll be taking questions during and after the presentation. And all you need to do is type in IYLI for life in all capitals or legacy and then put in your full question. And then we'll ask them during or after, during Q&A or presentation. So let's get right into the questions. Okay. So the first question we have here is, what are coronaviruses? What is unique about COVID-19, and how does it work? So like symptoms, the spread of it, is it airborne, etc.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and take this one. Thank you for reading the bios. I think you did a great job.
Thank you.
Some of those words for everybody might be a little complicated. So coronavirus is a positive sense RNA virus that we've known about the family for a really long time. The family of coronaviruses have affected us in multiple ways over multiple years. There are a number of coronaviruses that we have encountered over time, and those we don't necessarily have to get into, but I'm pretty sure some of you all may or may not remember MERS, SARS, and some of the others that have hit not only our nation, but this world in the past. And so what does that mean just in terms of what does the virus mean? Well, for one, we can at least surmise from the past is that the virus itself is pretty resilient in that we've always had our share of issues with trying to battle against this virus, which is why we try our best to have some sort of foresight as to mutations, adaptations, reassortments of sort where we could have a hybrid between SARS and SARS and MERS happening. And we've tried to get ahead of it. That's not always the easiest thing to do. And I'm speaking on this particular thing as a scientist. It's always difficult for us to predict what will happen. We have these models that we try to put together to try to get an idea of how this virus will behave in the future, how viruses from the family will behave in the future. But that doesn't always plan out. And in this case, we clearly don't know. We don't know that much about it. What we do know is that there are, so viruses generally come, you could kind of think of it as like an Amazon package coming to your house. The virus in this specific case it's not naked, it's enveloped, which means that it kind of has something that, keeps its genetic information kept together. And just like many others in the coronavirus family, this one is enveloped as well. And we've been able to create some protein structures, not only from a bioinformatic perspective, but like we've been able to crystallize some structures lately. A paper just came out a few days ago in Nature. And we have a better understanding of what the protein structure looks like. Now that's important because we can start to look at drug treatments and big drug screens, which are called high throughput drug screens, where we can screen tens of thousands of drugs at a time to see which ones are efficacious against the drug. And that's actually in the works right now. To talk about how it spreads, it appears as though right now the way the virus is spread is through respiratory droplets. And that's not uncommon. There's a virus that we commonly encounter nearly every year, and I'm almost certain everyone on this call has experienced before, which is called rhinovirus. Rhinovirus goes by another name, which is the common cold. And people have asked for a long time, why don't we have a vaccine for the rhinovirus? And that's because it mutates too fast. It has antigenic variation, and it just moves too fast. And that also comes by respiratory droplets. There are a couple others like Corona diphtheriae and a bunch of others that we just commonly encounter. So that's what it appears as though we are dealing with in terms of how the contact is coming. I know there are a couple cases here and there where they said it was able to survive on, tables and stuff like that, but that's anecdotal at best. And the best evidence we have right now suggests that it is through respiratory droplets. And inhalation, and it can have some occupancy in like our nasal and our pharyngeal areas. And to answer the last part of your question, what are some of the symptoms? So the symptoms are varying, and I'll talk about the ones that people have heard a lot about, and that's like respiratory distress. So people have had a very difficult time with this disease or with this virus and the infection, in breathing. And that's, so we think, and I'm saying we think because there is data to suggest these things, and I like to go off of a scientifically sound idea of things instead of what I'm personally seeing or what people are saying. The way we think about it right now is that, so your lungs commonly have components within each of the alveolar sacs that help to keep your lungs expanded so that when you breathe, they don't collapse. And you don't have something called atelectasis, which is where your lungs just collapse and you can't breathe that well. Well, if you crystallize some of that liquid that's within those alveoli, you literally, it's a harder barrier for there to be oxygen exchange between the air you're breathing and your blood. And obviously your blood is what's carrying the oxygen in your body. And so to some degree, this is sort of like fibrosis of your lungs, but not necessarily, because I think we're starting to figure out how we can break down some of that crystalline structure. And so the respiratory distress aspect is I think well documented. I think some of the less documented issues that are happening are headaches, anosmia, which is an inability to smell, a loss of taste. The headache piece is really big. And the reason why I bring up the headache piece is because some people will mistake the symptoms from coronavirus for just a migraine or dehydration or I don't know, just a headache and pop an aspirin, and then it doesn't go away, and then they end up with a prolonged fever, which is the bigger issue, and that's the last part that I'll talk about, which is this fever part. And I'll break this down because one of my frat brothers and a really close friend of mine, the godfather of my youngest child, just recently was co-infected with strep pneumoniae and COVID-19 at the same time. And he had a persistent fever for 7 days. That was, I think, like 103 to 105. And he was sent home because the threshold for a lot of people being hospitalized is 104 fevers. And so he was sent home with the persistent fever, but pneumonia usually has a less severe fever. And so that'll kind of bring it down a little bit below that 104. And the fever is an issue because if you think about proteins in the body, especially the brain, heat causes those proteins to linearize. They become linear. But when you think about a protein, it's generally this 3D structure that functions within a cell or outside of a cell or whatever, and helps, for vascular function or whatever. And so with heat, you lose the ability to have vascular control, right? Like blood pressure. And he just so happened to have hypertension, which is not a good issue because now you can't control your hypertension and you have a fever. And the brain itself doesn't do well under heat. And so you start to lose some cognitive function as well. And so I think the respiratory issues, the headaches and all these other side effects like anosmia and a loss of taste and things of that nature, and the fever are the big ones that everyone needs to really, really, really not take lightly. If any of these things happen, you need to get it addressed immediately because it can hurt you long term.
Thank you.
Real quick, if I just wanted to add something. Russell did a great high-level overview of it, but I just wanted to mention the distinction between coronavirus, COVID-19, and SARS-CoV-2. So coronavirus, as Russell mentioned, are the large family of viruses. So that's what the media has kind of just been saying it as coronavirus, but it's actually the actual disease that folks are succumbing to is COVID-19. And then the actual specific novel virus that's causing the disease is called SARS-CoV-2, which is severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2. So I just wanted to make those distinctions because there's a lot of terms that are going around, and I just want to make sure everybody understands that.
Thank you for clearing that up. Russell, you talked about the future a little bit, and I just a question I wanted to ask was, how long can we anticipate self-quarantine? How long do you think it will last before it's safe to go on to resume with our regular lives?
Yeah, so I think also Aaliyah, thank you for adding that. I always seem to forget that part, and I think it's more so because in the hospital we just look, you got Rona, we just need to keep it pushing, and I ain't got time to sit up and explain to you what this means. We just gotta treat you so you won't die. But thank you for that distinction, because I think sometimes we don't, it's not distinguished and people think it's all the same. It's not. I think my personal thoughts on this, and I think Fauci has talked about this a bit, is that I think this idea that we will all go back to normal life is it's over. It's just, we have to come to terms with the fact that people's hesitancy, people have a greater fear for dying quickly than long term, right? So people are more responsive to COVID-19 than they are to ads about quit smoking. And so the idea of short-term death, and I still have so much to live for, is causing people to be a tad bit more conscientious of their behavior. At least some people. I live here in New Orleans, and let me tell you something. They turning up like crazy out here. They still having block parties out here. So it's a whole different ball game, but that's a culture thing. And I kind of get it, because I think there's a whole nother aspect of this that we don't talk about. I'm sure some of the social health people, some of the socioeconomic and psychosocial people will talk about this. But life won't go on as normal. But I think pretty soon, I would say within the next, if things keep going the way they are, I would say within the next month, we will get back to some normalcy. but I don't think that things will ever go back to the way they used to be, because it'll be 100 or so years now before this is what happened with smallpox, or this happened. This isn't the first time this happened in the history of mankind. It's just we just so happen to be in a dispensation of time where we were able to experience it, and people were hesitant then. They will be hesitant now because we have more information. And even your generation, the younger generation, will just function differently. But I do think that we'll get back to it in probably a month or so. And I understand people's, exuberant want to go back to life as usual, but I think we need to not underestimate the calamities this disease has put forth on our country. We lost 20,000 people in a month. Like, that's pretty wild. And we haven't hit the peak yet. Imagine that. We haven't hit the peak yet. It's exponential. It doesn't go like, 0, 1, 2, right? It goes 2, 4, 16, 32, right? 60. It becomes like something crazy. And like in those numbers doubling that fast is, while on one hand, seems like we're close to the peak, on another hand is unpredictable. And I think even Fauci said this, like, we were talking about this before you got on the call, no trained physician on planet Earth right now, even the most brilliant trained physician on planet Earth right now, was trained for this. None, not one. So we don't know. In some ways we don't. But we aren't trained to be comfortable enough to say we don't know. We're just trained to give predictions sometimes. And that can be uneasy, but it's the way we're trained.
Thank you.
I just want to add to that, if I may.
Mhm.
I personally can't even fathom a date to put on this as us returning to normalcy, because I feel like there's just so many factors we're just like completely unaware of. There hasn't been enough research on it. When I heard that question, I just kind of thought back to what are they doing in Wuhan, China, where the virus arose from. And, they're kind of slowly getting back to normal. But as far as what that means, like, we don't really know who's asymptomatic. We don't know who's a carrier, who's still susceptible. Like, how do we know, like, things might clear up and then come right back? There's all these unknowns that are part of the factor. So I think we're just going to have to take approaches that are extremely precautionary and become a bit more cautious. Like, I don't think things will ever be normal again. Like, I think we're all going to be wearing masks for a while, washing our hands, limiting exposures to other people. And then I think everyone's taking it seriously at different degrees. So you have, some places like New York City that have seen the worst of it, and slowly things are declining. But then you have other places that haven't really seen the effects of it and aren't really taking it serious, and they may have their day as well. So I feel like every jurisdiction or every area is going through their own interpretation of it. And I feel as if until we get on the same page about how we're going to overcome it, I'm not sure we're able to really put a date on when it'll go back to normal. That's just my personal opinion, but I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Shalise, like, how would you, like, mentally, do you think people will be able to go back to, like, a regular life, like, mentally? Do you think this will affect them, like, mentally wise?
I do, because we are all creatures of habit. And so in taking that into consideration, things that we have been accustomed to doing or ways in which we have been comfortable in living our lives is going to change. And so we are aware that change can be difficult for a lot of us in understanding it. And also, just when we think about anxiety, there's a strong desire to ensure that we can control what happens around us in order to ensure that we don't feel anxious. and in understanding that we're going to have a sense of a new normal, it may be a challenge for a lot of us to just grow accustomed to what life will be like hereafter.
I guess sort of like adding on to that, what do you think are some practices that we can do to maintain our health, including our mental health, during this epidemic, since we're like all quarantined and inside? Like, what can we really do to make sure that we're, you know, still doing things we need to do, and just prioritizing and not, like, you know, stressing out over everything that's happening?
Yes, so the most important thing is to acknowledge that this pandemic has had an impact on our lives and allow ourselves to feel that. And in the midst of doing that, when we need to work on developing self-care plans. So self-care plan is something that we incorporate into our routine to ensure that we're addressing several areas of our lives, which include physical, mental or emotional, spiritual, professional, and social. So taking into consideration establishing routine, even though schools for many of us are closed or we are engaging in virtual learning, developing some type of routine around that. So maybe you still get up every morning and you get dressed. You make sure you have breakfast before school. If you feel like you need rest, maybe you have a nap in between classes, or you have a nap before you transition into the second part of your life. Of what you do after school, doing your best to still connect with those that you love, whether they're in your home or out of your home, using things like Netflix Party, the app, I think it's called House Party, where you're able to talk to multiple friends at one time. There are resources like a website that offers free Broadway shows, seeing if you could watch a Broadway show with a friend, doing a Zoom call, doing things that continue to help you feel connected with those that you love and care for. In addition to that, depending on where you are, each jurisdiction has their own rules and regulations, but if you can get outside, that's really important for your mental wellness, especially if it's sunny out, and understanding that your connection with the sun helps to boost endorphins and therefore can improve your mood, and connect and excite your neurotransmitters. So taking things like that into consideration, knowing when you need a break, because now everything that you do is housed in one place. Where you used to maybe go to school, now school is at home. Now your parents are home, and now their work is at home. And so just trying to navigate safe spaces for yourself within your home and expressing what you need to those that are around you. Maybe, from 5 to 6 p.m., that's my time to take a nap and I need to decompress, or that's my time where I'm going to listen to music and spend time with myself. Just trying to figure those types of things out would be very beneficial. And noticing when things are changing for you and being okay with asking for help. In addition to just asking your family and friends, also checking into, and I can add it to the chat, there are hotlines, text hotlines for mental health concerns, lines that you can call in. Each state is working to develop their own warm line to address mental health concerns that are associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. And so utilizing those types of resources can be beneficial.
Thank you. I guess you can all put some insight on this question. Do you think there'll be any positive outcomes from this epidemic, either through society or just how people act, anything like that?
I want to highlight one thing that at least I'm seeing in the hospital realm, which is people are a little bit less hesitant to go to get treatment now, which is amazing. Like it's just, I mean, I think we have this non-compliance issue in medicine and in healthcare, where people just, they'll come to the doctor, their, blood pressure's up or whatever. We give them, 1 or 2 meds, and then they're non-compliant, right? And so they come in with hypertensive crisis, or, some of the downstream effects of not taking your medication, maybe renal failure and things of that nature, or renal issues or edema or whatever. I would personally say, at least on an anecdotal level, but I know there is some data that suggests this, that's come out recently, from the AMA, from the American Medical Association, and some others, that people are I think there's starting to be this trend towards healthcare becoming an important entity in life. I think for a good bit of America, the idea of having healthcare is a good idea, and I need it. But utilization of that healthcare, and then the execution of what the healthcare officials are telling you to do, right? Like self-care and other things that she was talking about, people weren't doing. But I think now people, because death is facing us so much quicker, and some people don't, a lot of people put off taking care of their health until later because they feel like they got forever. And, they're seeing people close to them, passing away a little bit quicker than they expected. They are, I would say, patients are a tad bit more, on an anecdotal level, a bit more responsive. Even some of my friends right now who are doing telemedicine are checking in with their patients once a week, and their patients are trending in the right direction. And I think a bit of that is due to this idea that I don't want to just leave here quickly, and I do want to extend my life. And these medications that have been developed may be helpful in that sense. And I think the other part of it is that there's a conversation now that my personal opinion is that Bernie has been having for a long time. Bernie Sanders has been having for a long time. And maybe even Elizabeth Warren and a couple others, in that, but the reality of it is everybody needs healthcare at this point. Like, legitimately, people need healthcare, because the burden of it is that, right, like, so COVID-19 is hitting you whether you have healthcare or not. And the people who don't have healthcare still come to the hospital, and they can infect the people who do have healthcare. So the barrier is not healthcare or not healthcare. The barrier is really the healthcare. I mean, the burden becomes like disease or not disease. And the issue is that disease can affect people who have healthcare and not have healthcare, and that can overflow into everyone, whether you have healthcare or not. And so I think this idea about universal healthcare is becoming a bit more real. And people are a little bit less averse to having it. People are a little bit more willing to at least have the conversation, because they've seen a pandemic happen. They've seen something that affected them personally. Whereas when it was just, the others, when it was just everyone else who didn't have healthcare, it's like, oh, who cares? Right. But now it's spilling over into my world, and I don't want that to happen. So now let's make sure everybody has healthcare so that it doesn't affect my good thing. I think at least that's what I'm seeing, from a healthcare perspective.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Russell. And what I would say is it's shining a light on a lot of the health disparities that exist in Black, Brown, like Van Jones says, the Black, Brown, and broke communities. So like we've all known, forever that people of color are disproportionately affected by diabetes, asthma, high blood pressure, and all of these comorbidities that basically worsen your outcomes if you are infected with COVID-19. So it's unfortunate that, Black and brown people in Michigan and the city of Chicago, I think the death rate was like 60% or so. I think in Michigan, it was around 60% as well for Black people, those that were infected with COVID-19. So I think it's bringing a light to our health disparities in general. I know it's kind of bittersweet because we've known this information forever, but this pandemic is really shining a light on that. And I hope that this will inspire policymakers, advocates, and the youth to really push agendas that will make sure that things like this don't happen anymore, and encourage folks to take better care of themselves, because it's the numbers are there. Even the president of the United States mentioned that Blacks are disproportionately affected by this disease. And I think that's one of the better things that are coming out of this, is that there's actual proof, and it's not just rhetoric that we're just saying over and over in the healthcare industry, and that there's facts to back it, and we're seeing it in real time. Also, I want to mention that I don't know if things would have been different, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention that a lot of the public health infrastructure that was put in place after the Ebola crisis didn't exist prior to this happening. So in 2018, the current administration disbanded the, this has a really long name. They disbanded the National Security Council Directorate for Global Health, Security, and Biodefense. Literally, what they would do is they were a surveillance council that was under the White House administration that was basically meant to look out for things like this, and basically set up leadership so that there was some sort of chain of command and order in the event that a pandemic or an epidemic occurred. And we didn't really have that in place when this came about. So a lot of I can't say that it wouldn't have panned out the way it did, but however, we lack that type of structure, and hopefully this was a warning bell that we need this type of public health infrastructure and surveillance to prevent things like this from happening. And somehow I feel like it also comes off that like coronavirus is so new, no one knew anything about it. It just popped up out the sky, and that's not correct either. Like there have been USAID funded research institutes that were basically retired. They didn't get their funding in as recent as October, and they literally were doing research on viruses that jump from animals into human populations, and were providing research and important data to prevent things like this from happening. And the administration disbanded or discontinued that funding as recent as October 2018. So I think we're learning about a lot of the faux pas that policymakers commit, and sometimes we don't get to see it. Sometimes it's like, hidden and it's under the rug, and we don't really get to see the extent of what those mistakes, what their outcomes are. And now everyone can see now what it means and how important it is to have that type of public health infrastructure and research and surveillance going on, so that we can avoid or at least predict and know how to take on issues like what we're experiencing right now. So I think that's another bittersweet situation that is coming out of this whole unfortunate situation.
Thank you. So I have one more question, because we have like 4 more minutes before we head to the Q&A. So everyone can start, asking questions, getting their questions ready. But my last question for all of you to answer is, what has quarantine taught you about yourself and your role in the world?
I can start. In regard to my mental health, the COVID-19 pandemic has really taught me, or further enhanced the importance of setting boundaries. And so in the midst of all of this happening, as a working professional who still has the opportunity to work and offer services from my home, being able to set firm boundaries on when my workday ends, being able to set boundaries on, okay, what are things that I can do to kind of create this imaginary boundary? Whereas I used to drive into work, now I don't do that. So maybe I get dressed every day as if I'm going to work to kind of create that thing. But the most important thing is that this is a global issue, and within that, like, there's a level of interconnection that we all have. And so as we continue to see, because the mental health impact may come a lot later than what we're seeing right now, is that we all have something that we can connect with and be able to empathize with each other, because we know what this experience has been like.
Russell, Leah?
I would say it's really allowed me to just slow down and just be in tune with myself. Being at home is tough, and I feel like it's something that we just need to acknowledge. Like, we're not just like working from home and we're all, you know what I mean? We're all experiencing death, we're experiencing loss, we're experiencing uncertainty. And it's just kind of like made me just be a little bit more kinder to myself, and just like, when I'm feeling however I'm feeling, to just be okay with it and exist in those emotions. And then move on, but not to like suppress everything. And you know, it's also just allowed me to just be super grateful that I have the ability to work from home. I'm not required to go out in the field. And this is, I'm being a little jokey, but I'm glad I chose the field that I chose. I made a career switch because I wanted to be a doctor. And I'm like, I don't know if I could actually do this under these circumstances. So I'm grateful for all of our healthcare providers that are out here risking their lives, putting their lives on the line. I'm trying to find ways to just be, ease someone else's load. So I check in on my doctor friends, try to send them food, so try to send them Uber Eats, just trying to find my humanity in all of this. And I think that the world is finding their humanity through all of this, because it's just so uncertain. We're all kind of banding together. I think that's what I've noticed is we're all kind of operating on, altruistic feelings instead of the usual individualism that I think our culture kind of pushes, of like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you don't need, government assistance or whatever. But now we're moving towards, we're switching and changing paradigms where like Russell mentioned, maybe it's not a bad idea if everyone had access to healthcare. Or maybe it's not a bad idea that people have, family leave. Maybe it's not a bad idea that homeless people should, be sheltered. So I'm just glad that it's unfortunate that it took something this drastic to at least have the conversation placed on the table. So, but I'm just happy that I'm witnessing history, and, I'm really hopeful that it'll change us to a different and more altruistic conversation.
Thank you. Russell?
Yeah, I think I was telling them this. I was telling Tadea and everyone else earlier that I think the one thing that I've learned from this is you not gonna be trained for everything you're gonna encounter, and I think that's a hard thing to take into account, because the more education you get, I think the more you internally believe that you're prepared for what you are about to encounter, or there's some text or some resource, some research paper, there's some, some counsel letter or something that can guide you. And in this case, there's nothing. There's literally nothing. And we're learning things on the fly. And I don't think I've had to do that since I was deployed to the Middle East, to learn things on the fly. I felt like when I came back, I had time to just chill and just learn. And I think now we're learning on our feet, and that's kind of uncomfortable. And kind of answering another question I think somebody had asked, and I guess we may or may not get to that question depending on whether or not it gets selected by Latif, is watching my wife morph. It's kind of interesting because she's had to become like this person who's like the dude who always just strong and just does what he need to do and just keep his head down and keep going. Come home is like exhausted. My face is like, I'm dark skinned as hell and my face is red and inflamed, and my nose is like, I have like sometimes my nose is bleeding, and the air feels dry, and and like all these, it's just like, it's weird and it's new. But like watching the people around me, my church members and my daughters and everybody morph around me to like be there and like help when like I'm like, look, I ain't got it today, I can't be Superman today. It has taught me that I do have a tribe, and I probably need to depend on them more, and not be as independent as I have been in the past, which is kind of like one of those. I think it's also a toxic masculinity trait that is like, there's an underlying toxic masculinity trait that may be there, may or may not be there, that is kind of like surfacing now, that can be addressed as well. That was kind of uneasy, because like I would come home and my daughters would have a letter for me and be like, Dad, we hope your day was great, but even if it wasn't, like, we're here to like tie your shoes for you or get your socks for you, and I used to be like, go get your books and start reading, that's what time it is, and now it's the flip side of it where I don't have the energy for that. So it's taught me to depend on my tribe.
So we've gotten our first question for the Q&A, so we're going to start going into the Q&A. So the first question we have is from Catherine, and she asks, how do you cope with the emotions that come up when you have a family member on the front lines as a first responder, and how do you balance schoolwork? And also, if you guys want to link any resources like Shalice did throughout the conversation in the group chat, in the comments, you can. So if anyone wants to answer that question.
Yes. So it's natural to have a sense of fear about everything that's going on, and knowing that your family members are first responders that are working to help save the lives of those who are experiencing the coronavirus. And so while your fears are real and they're natural, that your fears can come and go. And so in understanding that, focusing on what you do know. So while your family is at risk, you do know that they are protecting themselves, that they are being precautious. You know that maybe even in your fear, they're in the next room, they're not working at that moment. And so telling yourself, okay, my family's home with me right now, my family is safe. Kind of doing things that you can to limit those thoughts are very helpful by challenging them with what you do know and what is present. And how to balance schoolwork. Honestly, I think that is something that may just continue to take time, because it wasn't set up to be like this. It wasn't expected that you would be at home doing school from your home with this big packet full of things that you needed to do. And so one thing that's really important that I'll mention again is establishing a routine. So when do you have school? When do you carve out time to ensure that you dedicate time to your schoolwork? And understanding this is something that as an adult, I've had to come to understand, like, the work will always be there. It won't go away if you decide to rest. And so if you find yourself becoming overwhelmed, if you find that your mind is not able to focus on that because there are other thoughts that are creeping in, take as many breaks as you need.
Anyone else want to add on to the question?
Yeah, I want to highlight this one thing that my wife has instituted in our house. And at first I was kind of resistant because when I got home, I kind of felt like I didn't want to talk about it no more. But she was like, nah, you need to do it. So just sit down and do it. Is if they're comfortable, if you have a family member who's close to you and they're comfortable, try to carve out a few minutes to sit down and just let them, if they are comfortable with it, pour out their feelings. Because, and I say that because I like, I'm gonna tell y'all this candidly. Look, bro, I done been deployed 2 or 3 times to the Middle East and places elsewhere, and I done seen a lot of death. I ain't never seen nothing like this in my life. Nothing. This is wild. This is out of this world. This is a whole nother ball game. And the fact that people dismiss this one thing. Usually when people die, a lot of them have family members around who can console, they can console each other. There's like a sense of community that happens. But people dropping like flies and family members cannot come see them. And those bodies are literally being packed up, put in a freezer, and then I guess in some places like New York, they just build in a big pit and just put them in the ground. Which is kind of wild. And so you don't know what these healthcare people are experiencing. You don't. And it's like, I think legitimately, I would be willing to say some people are going to come out of this with some PTSD for sure. And they're going to need some serious counseling. And imagine this, the people who are going to be counseling them went through it too. So, it's the sick treating the sick. And so I think if you have a family member who's on the front lines, ask them how they're doing, and do not tell them, oh, I understand what you're going through, because you don't. You really, really, really don't. And just let them pour it out. Because I definitely, when I first started, I was hesitant. I would give a few words and roll. And now, I may talk for like an hour and just tell them like all the stuff I got going on and like what's going through my mind, what's going through the mind of my colleagues, and like, what are we thinking? What are we worried about? I've gotten to the point to where, I have to like stand outside of my house and like walk into my house with just my underwear on to make sure that I don't take the scrubs into the house. And that's kind of uncomfortable in your front yard and just, so that's, that's a thing. And people sometimes don't have anybody to listen. Just listen. Like, don't just listen and let them go, because they gonna tell you what they got going on, and they might be carrying that weight, and you just need to listen. Or if you're not prepared to listen, ask them if they need somebody to listen. I think some people put some resources in there, direct them towards those resources, because in medicine, especially in healthcare, you've been taught to just handle it and just go, and not, and just go until you burn out. And in these times, we can't afford to lose anybody who's in healthcare right now. And so in order for us not to lose anybody, we got to make sure that we take care of them and kind of, be there for them. If you can do something nice for them, like, give them some warm socks, when they getting ready to get off of work. Some of them, sometimes I go in at 4:15 in the morning, and my wife doesn't have to, but she like wakes up and just gets up with me until I leave out and go where I got to go. And then she'll go back to sleep, or when they get home, meet them right outside or whatever, whatever. Let them know that you're thinking about them and not just worry about them. Because sometimes we could spread that worry from ourselves to them, and they already worried. Trust me, everybody in healthcare is worried. You could go on Twitter, you could see the Instagrams, you could see kinky girl who went wild, the nurse who was like, yo, stay your ass home if you ain't really that ill. We all worry. We worry. But it's worse when we worry and y'all worry. So just try to be there for us, you know what I'm saying? And that's probably the best way to put it. No, that's not the prettiest language, but I think sometimes we just got to put it how it is. People need people, and the people who need people right now are healthcare workers, big time, because they seeing something that this is kind of like Katrina all over again in New Orleans. in Charity Hospital. You got people in hospital beds anywhere and everywhere. You go walk in the emergency room right now, you liable to see patients on gurneys in the waiting room. It is wild. And that is something that none of us were trained for. Even EMTs, people who deployed, none of us were prepared for this. This is like World War II-ish or Vietnam-ish. This is crazy.
Hello, everybody. My name is Joaquin Noguera. It's a pleasure to share space with you all. Good to see some people I haven't seen in a long time. Aaliyah, I haven't seen you in so many moons.
Greetings.
Good to see your face. I actually called in, and I don't want to take up too much time, but I called in just hoping to be a part of the celebration for Michael. But I think I missed that portion, so I apologize about that. I used to be heavily involved.
It's at 3:00.
Oh, it's at 3:00. I'm sorry, I thought it was at 10:30. I misread that communication. My bad. Maybe
Oh, are you in a different time zone, Joaquin? You calling from? I see you calling from someplace beachy.
That's just a good background to cover up the mess behind me. But I'm in Los Angeles.
Yeah, so it starts at 12 noon your time and 3 p.m. Eastern Standard.
I see. My bad.
To see you here. You're actually like a perfect person to chime in on this topic like this, because it's impacting so many different people in different ways. Good to see you.
Yeah, I wanted to add a little something, just some background on I'm not even gonna give a whole lot of background, but I have been heavily involved in IYLI for a number of years and have stepped away for quite a few years now. But I just in listening to this dialogue and you all sharing the knowledge that you possess, I think that's just a healthy practice in itself, and it speaks to a larger thing that we can be doing, right? Because what we're doing is constructing knowledge. This is knowledge construction. In the world of education, this is something that teachers are taught to do. Get people together, get them to share their knowledge, to produce new knowledge so that we can move forward with what we know, right? Part of what I do is I look at the strategies, the practices, the interventions that can support holistic well-being. Whether that's we're talking about learning or we're talking about healing and transformation. It's really like what are the things that we can do to support the human organism to be well. And one thing that the research shows is that there's a recipe for death, disease, and disaster for humans, plants, and animals. That's basically all living things suffer under these conditions. And that's when three things come together: isolation, stress, and fatigue. The three things combined can become toxic and erode at any living being. And so part of what we've got to do is be intentional about interrupting those three things, right? That's part of what medicine is about. That's part of what community is about. Interrupting isolation, stress, and fatigue, right? Those three things, when they come extreme, can literally kill or cause death or disease. Now, in the case of something like this, there's another factor there. There's fear. Fear doesn't usually bring the best out of us. So when you combine isolation, stress, fatigue with fear, you have a deadly scenario. And now this exists on different levels of scale. This can exist for the individual. This can exist for the community, for the nation, right? And so much of how we're responding as a collective in this country is driven by ideology, by philosophy. That's why I appreciate some of what folks are talking about. Like they've been talking about policies, and some policies seem kind of realistic right now, right? Some policies seem real smart right now. Other policies seem neglectful, because those philosophies, those policies actually shape the everyday action. And so we gotta do, there was, Brother Russell was just saying something about, some kind of personal struggles might be around toxic masculinity. It's real because we internalize these philosophies and these ideologies, and then they shape how we're gonna live every day. Good morning.
Mommy.
And some of those things can lead to unhealthy behaviors, right? People joke about, and they make a lot of these memes about, well, I'm just living the way I've been living. Now everybody else, me. All right, that might have worked for a little while, but the reality is this is probably not going to go away anytime soon. And so we've got to figure out ways to maintain our holistic well-being in these different kind of conditions. Now, again, I'm not going to take too much time, but there's a key piece here, I think, that I want to just remind us. That is that Black and brown people have never been able to rely on the state, on the government, to attend to our holistic needs, right? Because it wasn't designed for that. It really wasn't. Part of the research that I'm doing right now is making a connection. It's building on this. There's this argument that we need to rethink what freedom means in this world, because a lot of the research and the studies on freedom are about like people got freedom from the government. But there's a brother named what's his name? West Indian brother. His name escapes me right now. He wrote a book called Freedom is Marriage. He says we need to rethink freedom, because freedom for people of African descent in the Americas sometimes meant leaving the system. Just the act of leaving was to pursue freedom, and to create your own space was about freedom, right? Now, I think that's a healthy analogy for us to think about our inability to rely on, first of all, we have, as Aaliyah pointed out, a president that's made some real deliberate decisions about taking away security, right? And that's in alignment with his philosophy, his ideology.
Neil Roberts.
There you go, thank you. Neil Roberts got some powerful ideas. This idea of freedom as marriage, that people of African descent have actually found freedom in stepping away from the chaos of the colonial environment, right?
Hey,
now,
I want to say
yes.
thank you for bringing that up, because we have been discussing the coronavirus in mainly like the context of the United States and mainly in the context of our specific localities. But the fact of the matter is, per the World Health Organization, that it is present in every country now. And like, that the fact that, we of course are like international, it means that we also can be looking internationally toward solutions and toward, just seeing how others are addressing this issue so we can learn, so we don't have to go through it. But it also reminds us that we can opt out of this system. And I want to thank you for naming that. We do have more space for Q&A. And I understand that we have like some students in the queue that we do want to get to. And I'm just like loving the energy right now. And I want to say thank you for uplifting that.
Hello, how you doing, guys? I think it's my turn to ask a question. My name is Yamani. I'm an alumni. Been with IYLI for some time now. I definitely love the fact that we're all here having this discussion. I think it's really imperative that like we're passing along like really informative information and not the fake news that's getting like broadcasted all over the media. So I'm grateful that, we're taking the time to do this and informing, our Black people in our community about the relevant information and the things that we need to know. So I'm obviously a young professional. I'm getting ready to graduate college next year. And it's a pretty scary time just because as a young professional, like, I feel like we just don't really know where the future is headed and, what industries and what jobs are going to be available to us in the coming future, seeing as there's definitely going to be some type of recession and like employment crisis. So I just wanted to, I guess, gauge from you guys' perspective, how do we kind of navigate, dealing with a potential financial crisis, and we're barely financially stable. We don't really have houses and, we're not living on our own quite yet, or at least I'll speak for myself. I'm not living on my own quite yet. So I'm just like kind of worried about, will I have employment moving forward, and, just ways that I can kind of by myself individually like navigate what's to come.
I think, I just want to shortly address something that you said, Yamani, that I'm pretty candid and upfront. That kind of made me uneasy, which was that I want to try to change this one part of the way that you're thinking about this, and that I'm looking at how the world is moving and seeing where I fit, whereas you could look at it as I'll carve out my space where I want to be. That's two different things. You feel what I'm saying? That's two different ways. I understand the challenge in that, But I also think that there is this ideology that, and especially Black men, we struggle with this sometimes, that I'm waiting on somebody to give me permission or give me a spot to fit into wherever they would want me to be, instead of where I really want to be. And I think it's also this idea that, and I can understand why this would make you uneasy. Don't limit yourself to where you are right now, in terms of like, if you're in New York, don't limit yourself to New York. You know, when I graduated college, I left Baton Rouge and moved to New York. I left Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and my family thought I was crazy to move to New York. It was like, yo, you wow. And I was like, yo, but there's opportunity there. So it made everybody uncomfortable, but I knew that getting outside of my comfort zone was what I needed to do. I think it's also important for you to come up with some long-term strategies and network with people in the field that you want to go into. I cannot stress to you enough how important it is to know people, and to know people who know people. You know what I'm saying? Like that's half the battle. A lot of the times is who you know. That's like half the struggle. You feel me? Nah,
just to like kind of combat like what you said, like both of those things, like first and foremost, are to me like the primary things that this program has taught me. Like first and foremost is one, not to limit yourself by location, and just to be able to be like mobile and travel the globe and not kind of see yourself in one place, but as a global citizen, and also just obviously networking. So those are two things I'm always thinking of. Those are like the primary, that's always where my head is at. But obviously, like, for example, I'm trying to get into like the sports industry. And right now, all the like leagues and things are closed because like they're suspended because of like human contact. They don't want people spreading the virus and things. So I definitely think there's going to be a shift in the way we look at sports, and the way that, you know, those things operate moving forward. And, you know, I just think that there's going to be less room and less space for like jobs and, you know, people getting employment in those fields because like obviously they want to kind of limit contact or limit the amount of people at these events and doing things. But I know there's definitely a space to kind of create and cultivate your own positions and find ways to create new ones and kind of navigate the industry in your own way. But I'm just curious, like, I guess maybe like where were you at during like the '08 recession, and like how did you navigate that? Because that's it's the closest thing I could think to that you might be able to relate to.
Yeah, when the '08 crisis hit, I was deployed. And so I was, you know, I think the military is always, you know, it's always the safe haven where you don't really feel the effects of, I mean, I did in terms of my retirement. It hit my retirement big time. But that's, you know, when you're young, that's okay, because you could take a lot of risk and you could bounce back because you got time, you know. But now I feel you in terms of that things will change. But the question I would ask you, and we could go offline with this, like I'll give you my number and we could have this chat afterwards, because I feel where you at, brother. I don't want you, I'm not discounting anything you're saying, and I totally feel for you. And I want to put you in touch with, like, I got friends who work for the Falcons right now and for the Saints. So and trust me, they still hiring people. I know that because they just hired somebody that I know. So that's I mean, the NFL is still drafting people in a few days. If that's where you want to go. The NBA is still going to do this draft, most likely in July or August. And we probably going to have more stuff going on, but they not going to stop hiring people. Because they're going to have a new realm of users that they can, you know, utilize. So the last thing I'll say is, and we'll connect offline, I promise we will, is don't be nailed down to a certain, you know, look for the juxtapose. So like a juxtapose to physical gaming is e-gaming. They kind of have the competition level in e-gaming right now is something crazy. And I have some homies who are professional gamers right now, and they have agents, you know, and they going around, you know, they might not be going around the globe anymore. I don't know about that part, but you know what? We'll talk offline about that, and get some things rolling, because I think there's potential for you to move forward, but just be a little bit more open to things being a little bit different. The landscape may look different. Jobs may look different. What you think of as a job now, or the way you were trained when you were in college, is what will my job look like when I, you know, grow up and become an adult, you know, and become like a working citizen. What will it look like? It may change, and that's okay. Things change. You know, the technology engineer of 10 years ago has a totally different job now, you know. but they kind of serving the same purpose. It's just in a different world.
I have a quick question before. Is that okay, Jade?
Thank you. There was a few people who are asking questions in the chat using the hashtag that we had mentioned, IYLI for life and legacy, and there was another question to ask. There's like a line of folks.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
My fault.
So, we have time.
No, I was saying also if you saw your question, and I'll answer as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So we only have like time for like one more question. So I'm just gonna like go in line. So China, you're next. So if you wanna read your question.
And we have 7 minutes left, and so let's see how many questions we can get in. We can try and
Yeah.
What do you call it? Rapid fire it. Let's see if we can do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so quickly, my question is just more general, but how can we support loved ones during this time, especially friends who may have lost people close to them?
Anyone wanna?
I don't know if Shalice is still on, but what I would say is just try to be present with your friends that may have lost someone, and just understand that everyone mourns differently, and everyone's mourning process will be way differently than what they usually would have, especially under these conditions. So I would just say be patient. Don't badger anyone. Give them time. I say try to get folks to laugh. That's what I say. I would say, you know what I mean? Like, don't force it, but I would like laughter, send good memories, send positive affirmations. But most importantly, I would just say be flexible with their mourning style. Because everyone is different, and you don't want to back someone into a corner. You don't want to make them further isolate themselves, but you do want to come off as a safe space for someone to confide in when they are ready. That's what I would say.
Our next question is from Tiana. Am I saying that right?
Tatiana.
Okay.
Hello.
Go ahead and ask the question.
Hello, everyone. How are you doing today? My question is, I have a family member she lost her smell and taste, and I was wondering what is a way, like, should she be concerned about this, or should she like take precautions? Or is there any supplements she could take during this time, or vitamins like could be good at this moment?
How long ago did it happen? How long ago did it happen?
She said it happened like a week ago.
Is that the only symptom she had?
Yes, it's the only symptom she's had at this moment.
I mean, I don't remember what the exact guidelines are for. Is she in New York?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't remember what the exact guidelines are in New York in terms of getting tested. I don't think that would meet the criteria. At least they wouldn't meet the criteria here in New Orleans, which is unfortunate. But it is what it is. But at least my knee-jerk reaction would be for her to self-quarantine herself, at least for a solid 14 days. Anosmia, a loss of taste. There may be other symptoms that are subclinical that she just didn't notice.
Yeah.
I would just self-quarantine for that 14 days. Hydrate a lot. Try to eat as many healthy foods as you can get your hands on.
Okay.
And just go from there.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Our next question is from Benedicta. If you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Okay. So my question is basically, are all areas of the city or the United States taking the necessary precautions during this time? And if they're not, will that be a harm to society? And this question is coming from like what I've seen in my neighborhood. So like I live by the Yankee Stadium, and this goes back to like the demographic of like COVID and like who it's affecting and stuff, things like that. But like further down, like up my block, there's more like projects and like people, like I don't know, it's very different because I live like closer to the Yankee Stadium, so like there's more police officers and things like that, and like the demographic is definitely different. So my question is basically surrounding the fact that those areas aren't like taking the necessary precautions. People are outside more and they seem to be ignoring what's going on, and I found that a little weird because I thought everybody was, you know, not being forced to stay, being forced to stay inside or self-quarantine. So will that affect or harm society?
Hi, Benedicta. Most definitely, it'll most definitely affect society if you're not following the precautions, recommendations, and guidelines that have been placed out to avoid transmission of the virus onto other people. But to be honest, from a U.S. perspective, every state has its own kind of way. They have their own way of handling it, and there's various degrees of enforcing those particular guidelines. So I think we're gonna, besides enforcement of particular guidelines, there's just different demographic and different culture. Like for example, why it hit New York City so hard. Everyone lives right on top of each other, so the likelihood of transferring the disease is just much greater because we all ride the subway pretty much kissing distance from each other. So that's an option of just the day-to-day cultural aspect is going to prevent it. As Russell said, they're still having block parties in New Orleans, and that's their cultural way of life and how it's proliferating the virus. And sometimes it comes down to just being totally what's the word when you don't like to follow directions? Rebellious and just totally defying those guidelines. So that's going to vary. And then on top of it, I think where it matters most is what the governors and the mayors, what their perspective on it is. Why I feel like it's affected the United States the way it affected it is because the president did not take it seriously. He for the most part dismissed it. And made light of it for a long time. And I think that affected everyone else's view of it, that it was, it's not that bad. Or there was misinformation that was sharing that people of color couldn't get it. And we proliferated that as a community, whether we were educated or not, as a joke, like, yeah, the Rona ain't getting me. You know what I mean? So I think we all take a responsibility. It should take responsibility for how this is played out. And I think it's extremely important for us to do self-policing. Call your grandmother, say, you're not going to church tomorrow. You know what I mean? I'll help you stream Easter Sunday service from Zoom. Your friends who were like, girl, let's go out. Let's just go. No, tell your friend we're not coming over. If you have a boyfriend and your boyfriend works at a supermarket, don't go see your boyfriend. So I think we all have to take responsibility and make sure that we're holding each other accountable so that this doesn't go any further. But like you said, as you mentioned, will this be a harm to society? Yes. If we're not following precautions, it will be a harm to society, especially in those neighborhoods. And then it'll be an even worse debt to the society, because if the virus is proliferating amongst Black and brown communities, and those particular communities usually have higher rates of asthma and high blood pressure and diabetes, there'll just be a higher mortality rate in those communities. So I think that's something we also should stress, and I can't stop stressing that even more, is that we're susceptible to this disease. Not more susceptible, everyone's susceptible to this disease, but the outcome can be a lot more devastating because of our pre-existing or comorbidities that exist. Comorbid conditions that exist. I hope I answered your question.
Okay, thank you. That was our last question of the Q&A, and I'll be handing this over to Johnny Lee to transition us to the next part of this.
So first, I just want to say Tanzania is in the house, y'all. So period. Hi, Aaliyah. How are you? Thank you so much for really like using your expertise and your professionalism and your resources to really be here today. Like, I think it's so important to have kind of alumni come back and, you know, speak to current fellows and past fellows and kind of like let them know, like, this is my drip and this just so happens to be my everyday life. And let me just educate you all on the profoundness of information that I have inside of my brain. So I'm just so here for that. Thank you so much, Russell, for, you know, I know you're a busy dad, busy, you know, just kind of trying to navigate everything that's going on at work. And I thank you so much as well for being here.